What's your best tips for the busy executives who may not think they need to take care of themselves just because they're always on the run?
I think first and foremost, if you don't have, we get really fixated on, especially whatever the hot topic is right now, whether it's like whatever you're reading or whatever, and all of a sudden you're really honed in on that thing, but then the others just fall to the wayside.
I think the executive who's running around all of the time and says, oh, maybe I'm not going to have lunch, or maybe I'm miss breakfast because I have an early morning meeting. They really do miss out on.
What I love about the Enneagram is that it is very multi-layered and it gives you a path to development and growth, where I think a lot of the other personality tests don't do that.
How does the management, how do the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, how do the leaders within an organization utilize that kind of information to be able to take to do something with it?
We have to be aware of the things that hold us back from what we really want, that kind of get in the way of that forward trajectory. And so that's why I think it's so honorable when people decide to dig into this Enneagram work, is because it's not easy. That's where I think leaders could get really specific and really understanding their people.
Welcome to the Compliance Leadership Lounge with host Ross Ronan, your guide for insightful discussions in healthcare compliance. In our lounge, leaders and experts gather together to share their perspectives and wisdom. So grab a chair, make yourself comfortable, and join the conversation as we dive into the strategies and stories behind effective compliance leadership. Whether you're a CEO, board member, or a compliance enthusiast, you're in the right place to learn, grow, and lead with integrity.
Welcome, Jillian, to the Compliance Leadership Lounge.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you and I have gone back for almost 2 years now, and I think we started with Ronan Healthcare Compliance. You came over and did an Enneagram workshop with us. We had different staff at that point in time, but it was really interesting to have you come over and do that for us. And then shortly after that, I think that you started working with our co-founder of Ronan Healthcare Consultants and training her and doing a lot of physical activity. And it's been a pleasure knowing you and getting to know you over the last couple of years. So I really appreciate you taking the time today.
I appreciate that.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about your experience in healthcare or health and well-being.
I have a degree in kinesiology, and so movement, sport, I played basketball in college, have all been a big part of my life for a really long time. And I didn't think that this would be where I arrived, but every choice I've made, all the jobs I've had have led me to this point. And movement, wellness, health have been a big part of my life for many reasons. My dad died of esophageal cancer when I was 16. And so that was a big lesson of taking care of your body and what can happen if you don't. Stress and food and all of those things playing a big role in that. And fast forward through a lot of steps, I arrived here in Denver about 12 years ago and now own a gym, a class-based gym, South Denver.
So where'd you move from?
So I moved from Colorado Springs. I lived in Manitou Springs right before Denver. And I used to manage a running store. So out of college, I did a few retail jobs. I managed a running store. I taught yoga for core power. And then in 2012, my brother was in a pretty severe Vespa accident, which left him in a coma. He lost his arm and he was in recovery up here. And at the time I was working for Lululemon and they were looking for an assistant manager for the Cherry Creek store. And so I moved up here in 2013 from Manitou.
And on the working outside as well as the retail side,
right.
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So that's great. You're like one of 3 people I know from Manitou Springs.
Oh, really? Yes. My mom went to high school there, as did I. It's a cute little, I call it like the Boulder of Colorado Springs.
You were one of the OGs for Colorado.
Yeah.
That's excellent. One of the questions that I always ask all of my guests, is there a book, an inspiration, something that has made an impact on you from a leadership perspective? Because as a coach, as an individual who is training others and running your own business, you obviously have to have some leadership abilities to be able to do that. What is your biggest kind of inspiration?
So I would say 2 things, 2 coaches actually. My high school coach played a huge role in my life. She coached me in both volleyball and basketball, and again was around when I lost my dad and played a huge role in understanding leadership, understanding my drive, my discipline, all of those things. And so she played a huge role in that. Her name is Bridget O'Connor. She's now the principal at Lewis Palmer High School. So a huge role for me was her. And then also I just think college coaches like Pat Summitt, who coached Lady Volunteers. I read all of her books, and I just think watching college coaches and learning about their philosophies played a huge role for me and have been super inspiring, even in my past basketball days, continuing on leading people now in my current life.
You're the second guest that we've had that have used a basketball coach reference to
Okay.
say they're one of my biggest inspirations
Yeah.
to do that. So obviously they
Yeah.
got to lead a lot of kids, a lot of teammates to be able to do well on basketball. So that's awesome. That's
It's been
great.
awesome to watch just like the explosion of women's basketball
I
in the
agree.
last few years, and Dawn Staley and everybody. It's really cool. I love it.
Yeah, you and I were talking a little bit before you asked if I watched sports, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I was here and there. I do watch WNBA now, and I obviously didn't before because it's a little bit more popular. But
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. It's a lot of interesting,
Yeah.
good basketball going on there.
Love
So
it.
that's
Love
good.
it.
Good stuff. Let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey. You currently co-founded Compass Fitness, which is class-based
Class-based studio. Yeah.
studio, and then you obviously have been in a lot of different aspects of being an entrepreneur. We're going to talk a little bit about your Enneagram workshops and things like that. So tell us a little bit about your journey, because I love
Yeah.
to hear how people go from, like you said, even working in retail to all of a sudden starting my own business and working through that and all
Mhm.
the challenges that you face.
So I'll start with the move to Denver, because I think that was a pretty significant pivot and pivotal moment for me. So working for Lululemon, and my brother brought me here to Denver, and I love Lululemon, the brand, the company. I learned a lot there. I also think that it was like a little leadership drop and to start that journey for myself in all the ways that they really devote time, energy into their employees. So when I was working for that company, I loved it, but the retail life was pretty hard. About 9 months after moving to Denver, I was currently coaching or teaching fitness for Core Power Yoga. And so when I decided to leave Lululemon, I was teaching at Core Power, and I just started trying to teach fitness and yoga all around Denver as much as I could. I think I was teaching for 5 studios at the time, just trying to like make ends meet and do what I love and get a broad look at what type of movement was being offered here in Denver. What classes, what type of movement was popular. I was doing that for a while, and in that process, met a lot of studio owners, developed relationships with them. I met a man named Philip Galaviz. I can never remember how to say his last name. It's amazing. He brought Sound Off Colorado to Denver. So as you remember, like the silent disco headphones. Yeah. So that was when silent disco was becoming a thing for like parties and weddings or whatever. But Phil had this idea to bring Sound Off Colorado to Denver in the form of offering movement classes with the headphones to like really hone in the experience, whether it was yoga or fitness, whatever. And so him and I started doing these pop-up classes at various venues, co-working spaces, studios, like warehouses, just wherever we could. And I would teach either fitness or yoga, sometimes both. And we would just do Eventbrite invitations and charge a small fee. And they just started becoming more and more popular. And at the time, I was teaching for a different gym before we opened Compass, and I was hired through that gym to teach a free class through Denver Arts and Venues at Civic Center Park at the McNichols building. So it was at Civic Center Park. After a couple of years of teaching at McNichols every week, they were like, "Hey, would you want to do an event here?" And so Phil and I came with all the headphones and sent out an Eventbrite, and month after month, it slowly grew, and Fit and Fold became a pretty big event, a monthly thing. And so they were like, "This seems to be going well. Would you like to do a fitness weekend?" And we were like, "Sure, I guess we'll create this huge event." So we created Fit Fest, and it was a 3-day event. And our biggest focus was exposing the Denver community to the amazing locally owned businesses and studios that we had here in Denver. So all the little guys. And we did things like we offered free kid care. We had a ton of food vendors, and our tickets were like $25 for the whole weekend. And we had 60 classes you could choose from. And so we had some outside, we had live DJs, we had all this stuff. And it was just a really cool experience. And we did that 2 years in a row. I think it was 2017, 2018. And that was, I think, a big turning point for myself in this belief that I was not only good at leading a class, but I could facilitate an event. I could facilitate a group experience. And around that time, my business partner, Heather Lawrence Harrington, she and I have been teaching various studios. I met her in Core Power in Colorado Springs in 2010. And we were like, are we going to keep teaching for everyone else and growing everyone else's business? Or are we going to do this for ourselves? And she was like, let's just try to find a space and do something for a year. Let's just see how that goes. So her and I started looking at spaces, and she called me one day. She's like, I think I found one. She was like, it's 7,000 square feet. I was like, that's not the size that we talked about, but okay, we'll give it a look.
Class.
Yeah, it's a big class. Heather had been here in Denver for now 10 years. I had been there for 6 or 7. And so we had developed a following enough to at least get us started. And so we decided to do a 1-year sublease at our current location. And 6 years later, here we are. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Very nice. So 6 years you've had Compass Gym?
Yeah, we just celebrated 6 years in May of this year.
And I've taken lots of classes. So
Yes, you have.
Yes. My punch pass has been upped a few times. So very challenging classes, I will have to say, but
Thank you.
worth every bit of it. And the brunch afterwards is
Yes.
very much worth it.
Yeah.
So you have this gym and you're really doing all this great work. You've also done lots of things like being fitness instructor, personal trainer, that's on the side too, but endurance coach, I think, as well, and Enneagram workshops and nutritionist. From that standpoint, like how do you juggle all of that? You put all that stuff together. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Sometimes it does feel like a lot, but I think it keeps me really engaged and I'm really dialed in. I love each aspect individually for each of its own components. And I think they fit really well together. If we're looking at whole person, we're looking at the mental piece, the emotional piece through the Enneagram, the fueling yourself piece through nutrition, and then obviously the fitness and the movement aspect. And I remember I was telling a friend of this the other day that like, I remember 10 years ago being like, what's my career path? And there was nobody that was like doing the evolution in a way that I was like, yes, that looks like a fun time. I will do it that way. And I was just frustrated that I was having to piece it together. But now 10 years later, I'm like, of course that's how it had to happen because what I'm doing is really different. And there's a lot of components to it. And so it obviously started with the fitness element. And then before COVID, I started my nutrition program. I did the Nutritional Therapy Association. It was amazing. So I was finishing that up around when COVID started. And then honestly, personal training, I've done personal training over the last 15 plus years, but it's ridden the wave of high and low depending on demand or whatever. But with the mandates that were going on in Colorado, there was a time the gym was closed and we were only allowed to personal train. So like that. And then with the Enneagram started for me in 2010. My mom's best friend from elementary school was a therapist in Eugene, Oregon. She came to visit and she was using the Enneagram a lot in her practice with her clients and introduced our family to the Enneagram. And from that point on, I was pretty much hooked and obsessed right away because I just felt, wow, this tool really seems to outline a lot of how I feel about myself and my experience in the world. And I just thought it was a really cool tool. So I used it mainly for my own self work and development. And then coming to Denver and opening Compass, I met a couple people, 2 therapists in particular, one male, one female, and I started co-leading workshops with them. So we decided to use the movement aspect and the Enneagram paired together to kind of elicit awareness and growth through those 2 things combined. So I worked with both of them and offered some workshops, which really headed my Enneagram work here in Denver.
Well, we're going to dig into a lot of that here in a second. So let's just go back to we'll call it wellness. So fitness, nutrition, things of that nature. When we talk, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are healthcare executives or CEOs or CFOs. They're COOs are also board members. We often talk about being a business athlete, right? And what does that mean, being a business athlete? It's really preparing for business like you would prepare for an athletic event, right? You have to get your mind in order. You have to get your body in order. You have to get your head straight before you compete against anything. And then as you go through it, you truly are competing at the highest level, not only as a business, but as an executive. So what's your best tips for the busy executives who may not think they need to take care of themselves just because they're always on the run, they're always going, they're always in the airports, they're always doing stuff? We always talk about mind, body, spirit, making sure all those 3 things are centered. What's your biggest tips for those executives?
I think first and foremost, if you don't have your health, you have nothing.
True.
And I think about the fast-paced execs and just constantly moving ahead, moving at this intense speed. and then some catastrophic event happens with their health and they're like completely sidelined, completely blown away with, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so I think it's really important to prioritize health in all aspects of health while you're trying to take over the world, because you don't want to be surprised and sidelined suddenly. So I think that keeping in mind, like, your health is your biggest asset and powerful tool. And it's not just your physical health, as you mentioned. So we look at the mind, we look at the emotion, we look at the physical, and we look at the fuel, the nutrition aspect. So how you're moving your body, how you're fueling your body. I think that sometimes we can have blind spots and we're like, oh, I'm really focused on eating well, but there's no movement and there's no personal development or personal looking inside or growth there. Or I'm really focused on exercising every day, but I'm sleeping 4 hours a night. So I think we get really fixated on, especially whatever the hot topic is right now, whether it's like whatever you're reading or whatever, and all of a sudden you're really honed in on that thing, but then the others just fall to the wayside. So I think it's keeping the focus of all of the things in regards to those health components a priority and not letting it like fade away into the distance. So sleep, I think, is a big one. Stress, a big one. How you feel your body and movement every day. Those are like the must do's, I think. And so if you're an exec that's traveling or whatever, keep those things a priority, the non-negotiables, as you're moving throughout your work week.
How big is routine?
I think routine's huge. Again, it's just like the days fill up, the meetings fill up, everything gets busy. And those things have to stay a priority because they're all very equally important.
Yeah. The other thing is nowadays, too, in my opinion, there's been a lot of availability of ways to monitor your kind of nutrition, your health on a routine basis. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, probably continuous glucose monitoring was something for diabetics. And that's only people who would get that. And now it's so readily available for certain things. And I think a lot of the things that I use and we use in our nutrition daily therapy probably have come from suggestions from you, which is continuous glucose monitoring. The Oura Ring's fabulous. And there's so many different things that you can do to constantly maintain your health, to worry about your sleep, to worry about your stress load, to make sure that you're not spiking your glucose for whatever reason that can cause gaining weight in excess or not being able to burn it off as quickly. So I think the monitoring part of it's really important too. And I know you're a big proponent of that.
Yeah. Scale and the step counter. Like that's
Right.
what we had for so many years. And
Of
all
course.
of a sudden now we have all these amazing tools. And I think why they're so important is it's just like in your face feedback. Like you can't ignore.
Right.
If you think about the scale, it's like all of a sudden it's up and you're like, what happened in the last 2 months?
Right.
Because that time already came and went. And now what are we going to do about it? So I think that these tools that you mentioned are just, you can't avoid the feedback, right? You're seeing it right in front of your face. If A plus B equals C, if I have 4 glasses of wine, I don't sleep, what's the next day look like? You can't run away from the data. And so I think that's like really been powerful for people to see like diet, lifestyle choices equal, this is my health. So I think it's just like such a cool, powerful educational tool for people to really understand the body. I think CGMs are creating this huge awareness around metabolic health. And I think it's the next big wave of true understanding about health that we've missed a lot in the last 20, 30 years.
I think the executive who's running around all of the time and says, oh, maybe I'm not going to have lunch, or maybe I'm miss breakfast because I have an early morning meeting. They really do miss out on the fact that these kind of things do affect you in a long-term basis. It affects your performance. It affects your thinking. It affects your health. And like you said about the scale, sometimes stamping on the scale doesn't necessarily mean things are bad.
Or tell the full story.
You could be building muscle and gaining weight and losing body fat. So that's a good thing instead of a bad thing. So I totally agree with the monitoring.
And it's so I've worked with executives. I've worked with firefighters.
Mhm.
I've worked with hairstylists. I've worked with full-time moms. And so everybody has their individual like outline of their day and what gets in the way of their health. Like I've worked with firefighters who work these overnight shifts.
Mhm.
And then they're like, oh my gosh, my glucose is so volatile the next day. And I'm like, well, yeah, like there's a look at what not sleeping does. But we all have our daily routines and our weekly routines that we have to be so honed in on. What are my gaps? What are my weak spots? What do I have to be aware of specifically for my life right now, which I think that's what CGMs do. It's like a very individual like fingerprint.
Very much. Yes. So let's talk about the Enneagram a little
Yeah.
bit and the workshop and how it factors into leadership. So you talked a little bit about how you got into it. Curious as to, you indicated the person that you learned about it from or really got you into it, they put it into their own practice. Was it a counseling practice,
Yes,
a psychology
she's a
practice?
therapist.
Is a therapist. And so when you think about the Enneagram and what affected you personally, do you use that in your professional life too when you're dealing with clients? Do you do that with your owning a gym and your partners in a gym and the students that you're teaching every day? Do you put that into place as well?
Yes, D, all of the above. It's the thread through all of my relationships.
This episode of the Compliance Leadership Lounge is brought to you by Ronan Healthcare Compliance. At Ronan Healthcare Compliance, we believe in transforming healthcare compliance from a checkbox attitude to a strategic advantage. With decades of expertise, our team provides innovative solutions tailored to your organization's unique needs. We don't just help you meet your standards, we elevate your business, ensuring ethical practices are at the heart of what you do. Whether you're navigating complex regulations or seeking to enhance your compliance strategy, Ronan Healthcare is your partner in achieving excellence in healthcare compliance. Ronan Healthcare Compliance, redefining compliance, empowering leadership. Visit us at ronanhc.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
So as we dive into the Enneagram and how it actually works in leadership and in companies for leaders to be able to initiate, tell us a little bit about what it is, because I think it's really important for everybody to understand what kind of personality test this is and what does it do.
So it's funny, people ask me what my elevator pitch about the Enneagram is, and I hate to call it a personality test because I think it waters it down and it also puts it up against all the other personality tests that are out there, which I think all of them are great because all of them hold up the mirror to who we are, what are our traits, what do we need to be aware of. But what I love about the Enneagram is that it is very multi-layered and it gives you a path to development and growth, where I think a lot of the other personality tests don't do that. So the Enneagram is a personality-based tool that helps people understand themselves better, what drives them, what motivates them, how they communicate, what derails them. And it's a huge tool, I think, for business owners to better understand their people.
You're dealing with leaders, and just to be fully transparent, you've done 2 workshops for our business. For me, as an owner, operator, for running and dealing with lots of different people, I find it extremely valuable. I really do. I'll tell you, when you first came out and started to talk about it, it was nice to know. It was interesting. But as we started developing our staff to make sure that they can perform at the highest levels that they need to perform, which is what I'm about. Like, how do I get the most out of everybody to be able to, so they feel good about what they're doing and how they're performing? Really understanding what they are as an Enneagram is really important. And I'll often find, and we can talk about this in a second, that a lot of people misclassify themselves because they want to be something that they're really not because it sounds really good. And I would say that the first time I did it, I did the same thing. I was like, oh, I'm this. I'm the perfectionist because I really want to be that, and I'm not. And so it's really funny that people do that. But I think it's really important because as leaders and as people who really need to manage their staff to really understand kind of how people work. So you talked a little bit about people understanding themselves, which I think is very important. Let's talk about that real quick. But I also want to follow that up with, how does the management, how do the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, how do the leaders within the organization utilize that kind of information to be able to take to do something with it? So let's talk a little bit about individuals understanding what their Enneagram. Why is that so important? And literally, how do you? Because it can be sensitive, if you will. It can be a little bit criticizing at some point. You look at it and you're like, oh, that's not me. I don't want to be that person. It's funny. We visited some friends of ours over the weekend and we're guessing what their Enneagram would be. And some of the traits that we found on one person, they're like, oh, I don't never do that. And they always want to back away from it. And somebody over in the corner is like, yeah, you do. So tell me a little bit about dealing with that on a personal standpoint.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of people tell me, like, wow, this is so spot on who I am. I hear that. And then I also hear which is what I also experienced when I first learned that I was a 9. I read about a 9 and I was like, gross. I don't want to be this. 9 traits got me to be a great people person and be able to manage a lot of people at the same time. But we have to be aware of the things that hold us back from what we really want, that kind of get in the way of that forward trajectory. And so that's why I think it's so honorable when people decide to dig into this Enneagram work, is because it's not easy. And there have been times where something comes up in my life and I'm like, gosh, dang it. Like, I really dug into this 3 years ago and I thought I figured it out and it's on loop again. So we all, each of the 9 types have these sort of knee-jerk reactions, these traits that we have to be really aware of, because that in our knee-jerk reaction, we think, oh, this is just what I do. This is who I am. But really, does avoiding conflict for me as a 9 help me in my life? Absolutely not. So I have to really step up to the plate and be like, actually, I'm going to do things different. I'm going to do they say in the Enneagram, the best work is to work against your personality type, those knee jerk reactions. So I think that personal awareness helps you achieve what you want to achieve in this life, maybe faster, more efficiently. It helps you have better relationships, more depth there, more understanding, more compassion. So that's why I think some of the reasons for deciding to dig into it from an individual level.
One of the things we talked about, I think, in our last workshop was that these personality traits really do get developed from what I think you said 5 to 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting because we all have had our different lifestyles. We've all grown up differently, and we've all can actually probably pinpoint that time period. At least I can, when I'm like, that's when I become the 8, right?
Yes.
And I'm an 8, I'm a challenger. I think it's got like lots of names to it, but I like the word challenger because I do ask questions about everything, no demand. And a 9 is a what? So what is the name?
Peacemaker.
The peacemaker.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not world peace we're after. It's internal peace, tranquility. So yeah, having everything being copacetic.
And,
Yeah.
and I also found it very interesting, and everybody who's listening, please do an Enneagram assessment, because I do feel like it really can tell you a lot about yourself. You talk about internal struggle with a 9. There's a lot of things that this is about how you feel about certain situations. Another thing you said in the workshop is a lot of the traits have the same kind of maybe outward action that happens, but really it's the rationale of why.
Why? Yeah.
And I thought that was very important to really think about, because as a person who needs to really understand who they are and how they do things, it's not necessarily how you do things, it's why you do them.
Yes.
And it's funny that 9s have this personal internal conflict that they are dealing with all the time. I have no internal voice. It doesn't tell me anything. It's always external, which is that's one of the traits of an 8. But I find it very interesting to say it's the why that really matters.
Yes. And I think that's how if people are stuck between 2 or 3 types, I think the Essential Enneagram book is really good at comparing types and getting to that underbelly, as you said, of the why. Because, for example, 9s and 2s give up their needs, a trait that seems pretty
And
obvious.
2s are what?
2s are the helper. Yep. So 9s and 2s are often mistype or look-alike types. So I'll use this as an example, is 9s and 2s give up their own needs, but why they do it is very different.
Right.
So from the external world, they look very similar. It'd be easy to mistype those people. But looking at why are they giving up their own needs? 2s give up their own needs because they want to appear lovable. And their belief is, if I have needs, I'm not lovable. And that's the desire of a 2, is to be lovable, to receive love. And they give love to get that. 9s give up their needs to avoid conflict, to avoid any sort of like keeping everything in the apple cart, like keeping it copacetic. And if I express a need, I could then run into conflict, or there could be something that causes a disconnect in a relationship or a connection, things like that. So again, the why part is really important. And that's where I think like leaders could get really specific and really understanding their people.
That's exactly where I wanted to go with this,
Okay.
was individuals understanding why they do things and how they do things and why they do things as it relates to the Enneagram. And then double pairing that with a leader who understands why an employee, a manager, somebody that works for them or works with them is really doing the things that they do.
Right.
And I think understanding that is a big challenge for leaders, because just as anecdotally as my story has always been, or it's changed over the many years I've been an executive, but I always felt like everybody should do the things my way. right? The ways that I want them done, because it's really important, because I've been successful and this is the way that it should be done. This is the way I want it to be done. And this is the way that you should do these things. But since we've started doing this Enneagram workshop and working with you, it really has changed it to say I can still get the desired outcome, high performance, great objectives, great whatever, and really understand what motivates a nine, what motivates a two, what motivates a three, to be able to do all these things. Well, two's a helper, nine is the peacemaker, yeah. And then a three is the achiever or something,
achiever.
the achiever. And is really, we have a lot of those people in our firm, and really understanding how they all work together is really important. So understanding that why piece of it as a leader, talk a little bit about how your workshops and when you bring these people together in this kind of corporate setting, ours is not really corporate, it's a small business, but how does it work with the workshops to be able to integrate that leadership with the individuals and really be able to talk on an open basis
Yeah.
about their Enneagram and how things work?
The first important part, if you are somebody who owns your own business or in a leadership role, why the Enneagram? I think it's knowing and believing that people bring their full selves to work. We do the best we can, leave our personal lives at home, but we're bringing our full selves to work every day. And you're working with these people day in and day out. When you look at the Enneagram and in the 9 types, I love what you just said about coaching to the individual and seeing the benefit of not just doing it your way. Is all 9 types have really cool, beautiful, unique traits that are going to uplift a business. Like very specifically, all 9, and we could talk to all 9 if we had the time, but it's cultivating that and bringing that out in your employee, right? And so how do you do that? It's understanding that type and you as their boss, as their leader, getting so curious to know who they are, what motivates them, what drives them, what derails them, and also how do you coach to that? And what I love about the Enneagram is it shows you this like evolution of health to where, say, you're coaching me as a 9 or you're
Right.
trying to develop me, how to push me, but also keep the space safe for me, for you to be like, hey, Jillian, I know this is really tough for you because of XYZ. I'm here. Let's talk about it. What do you need out of this conversation in order to move forward? And I love telling leaders that of you know exactly what each of us need in order to move on to the next thing. We walk away from a conversation feeling good, feeling settled, and feeling ready to move forward. And I think that part is really cool about the Enneagram is we get really specific. And it's not that you're like, oh, so and so can't handle this or whatever. It's how do I create a safe space for them to show up as their full selves and know how to bring out the best in them as their specific type.
Great way to put it. And I'm going to use it. I'm going to steal it. Sorry.
Okay.
People showing up as their full selves. It's very interesting from that perspective, because there's a lot of leaders out there who are like, you're just not bringing your A game. You're just not being here. And I think that's really a lot of how they deal with their employees and how they're able to motivate them. We have 9s in our organization too. And so I can say this to you because you're a 9. I was reading in one of these books that they're often seen as a little bit lazy. A lot of it has to do with not wanting to confront people, not wanting, this is really hard for me because now I have to
Gotcha.
get in front of somebody. And so
Yep.
therefore I'm not going to do it. And therefore it becomes a lazy type of thing for someone to be looking at. 2s are helpers, right? And they need to be talked differently than 2 differently, or motivated differently than a 3, right?
Yeah.
And once you start understanding and realizing that, you can really cater to their strengths, because everybody, like you said, everybody has strengths and everybody's bringing their full self to work. That doing it wrong, which I have done on many occasions, can be disastrous. Like it literally can be disastrous. If you start to talk to a 3 the same way you would talk to a 9, they're going to be clear, like, in my opinion, 3s who are I cannot remember the damn
The
name.
achiever.
The achiever. So the
Yeah.
3s who are the achiever, they will confront anything about anybody to anything, right? You're like, go confront these people and figure out how to do this. You do that to a 9 and they're like, I'm not doing, that's not in my DNA. And doing it wrong as a leader can shut people down. They can quit over it. They can move on. And so it's so important to be able to do that, so you can motivate people.
Yeah. And going back to the why, 3s, 7s, and 8s have no problem with being assertive. Giving, receiving, no problem with it. 9s, for instance, and there's some other types, 2s as well, sometimes 1s, need a moment to go gather resources in order to take action. And that can sometimes feel slow to people, but actually that's a huge benefit.
Right.
Right? Because what happens with 3 sometimes they get into action before they have all the information and then we have a misstep. So looking at how does each type within my business actually elevate the business as a whole? And for you, I can imagine as a business leader myself, you're like, oh, this is slow. But actually, like when a 9 gets into action, you can trust them to complete it without even following up. They're going to take it to the end of the road. And so there's this dynamic within the Enneagram. They talk a lot about think, feel, and act.
Mm-hmm.
So the Enneagram is broken down into 3 triads. So we have 8, 9s, 1s are in a triad, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so each of those triads has, and each type individually has a relationship with think, act, and feel. And we have some of those that feel better to us and then feel really natural, and some that we pump the brakes on.
Mm-hmm.
So getting into action for a 5 or a 9 can sometimes feel harder,
Mm-hmm.
but the thinking and the feeling feels really good. So again, that's what the example I was using of like once a 9's in action, they've thought about it really intellectually and thoughtfully that they can execute it versus the speed of maybe other types.
And it's funny you say that because I have firsthand examples of this, and I won't go into them. But as you said, as an 8, which obviously is a challenger, I do find that sometimes things are like, why is this taking so long? But I will tell you, since we've started our workshops and since we've really started to identify the right Enneagram for each one of our employees, I look at them totally different. If I say, why is this taking you so long as a 3 to be able to do it? It actually has a reason behind it because I know that you'll act fast and I know that you'll do it. So something is wrong.
Yeah.
Versus, like you said, with a 9, now I look at it and I'm like, okay, they're taking their time, they're gathering their information, they're going to do it the right way, and I don't have to go back and do it. It may not be done, in 24 hours. That's
Right.
okay. But if I say it needs to be done by Thursday at 5 p.m., they'll take the steps and it won't be done on Tuesday. It won't be done on Wednesday. It won't be
Right.
done Thursday morning.
Right.
It'll be done Thursday at 5 p.m. because that's when they've achieved their ability to do
Absolutely.
those things.
I love a deadline. You love like a parameter,
Another
so
great thing too.
yeah.
Those are great things. Don't ever tell a 9 that I need this soon.
Yeah. When is soon?
Exactly. Yes. Soon
Yeah.
has to be 5 o'clock on Friday. You
Yeah.
tell me what soon is.
Yeah. And I'll say another thing, a little tip for leaders who are using the Enneagram as a tool is it's really easy to be like, I worked with a 9 or I was in a relationship, whether it's romantic or whatever,
Sure.
with this type. And so now that's your sole view of that type. It's so easy to do. We've all done it. But to really understand that there is a health spectrum
Sure.
of each type. So it's really easy to be like, okay, we hired this type and it didn't work out well, so we're not going to hire that type again. You got to give everyone the benefit of the doubt to know that they're coming in with their own life experience. They're coming in with their own growth. Myself, Jillian, 10 years ago was a totally different 9 before owning a business, things like that, than I am.
So I'll dovetail into understanding what the person is, in my
Mhm.
opinion, and
Yes.
then how they can achieve types of growth into the other personality traits. I think there's like things like wings is that some of those traits may take on. So like an 8 may be close to a 9 and a 1, right?
Yeah.
And
Or
sometimes
7. Yeah.
7, yes.
Yeah.
If you go wrong,
Yeah,
7 and 9, right?
Yeah.
And so you do have those kind of traits, which I think we all strive to be. And that was what I was saying before. I scored a 1, which is the perfectionist, and that is not me, right? That is
Right.
not me. But I really want to be that person.
Right.
But I do feel like for at least our employees and being a leader, understanding the base belief behind how and why people
Mhm.
do things
Yeah.
is the only way that they can grow into other types of Enneagrams and with their help, with their mentorship and their coaching.
Yes. And the internal wiring of your type never changes.
Mhm.
Okay. So getting clear on what makes us each type. Each type has a core fear and a core desire that facilitate our lens of the world, right? So my core fear desire, your core fear desire are never changing. It's about being aware of them and how they elicit action from us or inaction from us. So again, people always ask me like, can you change types?
Mhm.
No, you don't. We would like to sometimes, and we envy certain traits in other types, but yes, so it's understanding the core fear to core desire are always there. That's the first most important part. And then Another element of the Enneagram that I really like is that there are these elements under the umbrella that get a little bit more specific. So we have the wings, which that means you pull traits from the two types that are next to you on the diagram. So if you're a 7, you have an 8 wing and a 6 wing. So you're pulling from directly side by side. And so you pull traits sometimes equally balanced, sometimes more from one than the other. So that's an element of the Enneagram that I really like. Another one is directions of growth or stress. So one of the components talks about when we're under tension or stress, we go to a place or go to a type and we start to look like that type or pull more negative traits from that type. And then we have a place that we go when we're in growth mode and we take on the highest positive traits of that type. So that's the second element. And then the third element is basic instinct. So the Enneagram, in the verbiage, they say that as humans, we all have 3 instincts. We have the self-preservation instinct, we have the social instinct, and then the sexual or one-to-one instinct. So in the Enneagram, they say that there's 2 out of the 3 that we tend to spend a lot of time and energy in and on. And then we have 1 that kind of hangs off. And the goal is that we spend equal time, we find balance in all of those traits. So what I like to share with people too is that like a self-preservation one could look totally like a different type than a social one. So sometimes people have told me that when they really learned about their instinct, that really helped clarify their type as a whole. So if you look on the Enneagram and 8W9 or self-pres 8W9, that means you're self-preservation 8 with a 9 wing. So that's just like little details of how the wording looks.
And I love this in these books and in your workshops. You do talk about this growth versus stress area of the Enneagram. And as a leader, as a mentor and a coach to a lot of different people in business, that to me is so important to pay attention to. So when you start to see one of your employees start to take on some other traits that you're like, wow, they don't usually act like this. They don't usually respond this way. And let's say they're stressed, right? It's a clear indicator that there's something going on. There's too much work. There's not enough resources. There's something that is causing this problem. And on the flip side of it, when people are just outperforming and they're looking way different than they are.
Yeah.
They're in that growth mode and maybe they need to be promoted. Maybe they need to do something else. Maybe they need more challenge than they currently are. Who knows? But using that information about what makes people grow or stressed really can help a leader to manage their employees.
Yeah. And that example you just gave of growth mode, it's like, what am I doing as a leader that's encouraging them to be in this mode? How can we do more of that? And encourage them and say, wow, like things look to be going really well. What has changed in the last week, month, whatever? How can we elicit more of this? And then really important detail, noticing when the stress and those traits that occur that you're like, wow, this is not typical of this person. Let's stop, let's pause. And I think that's a great trait of an 8 to be like, hey, let's sit down, let's acknowledge what's going on in this safe space that we've created and get you back on track. And what I noticed too with myself owning a business, I know 9s go to 6 under stress. I become super worst case scenario thinking like the world's going to end, the business is going under, those types of things. So I'm really aware of my 6ness under stress. And then going back to the wings, I walk into the gym and I turn into a 1. I like imagine everything that's out of place, what's going well, what's not. I hear the volume of the music. I see equipment that's not in the right place. Like I take on more traits of a 1. Some of it's you can giggle at yourself like, oh, there I am doing the thing again. But it's all about awareness and seeing where, wow, that really works well for me. That's an added addition to my general 9ness.
When you talk about these workshops, what size of organizations do you do them for?
Anywhere from a 5-person team to a 20-person team so far. I've had some virtually that have included more than that. And then I do some workshops that are a little bit more general for larger groups that just want to learn about the Enneagram, not necessarily from a leadership perspective.
How often should a company do workshops? Because that's really important. Like, is it every year? Is it twice a year? Because at some point in time, are you doing the same thing over and over again? Or are you always learning something as a company?
Yeah, I think first of all, it depends on does your team change? I think that's a big part of it. And I think that the more that you can have it be very common language within your team, the better. So the more that the team is committed about first learning about themselves, that's a number 1 part. And then the second part is who are they working for, who are the leaders in the company, and who are they working with. I think, honestly, it should be part of the weekly dialogue. And the teams and the companies that have, I think, succeeded the most using this work have kept it a part of the regular weekly, monthly verbiage in communication with the team. And everyone's committed to learning about it, because I'm 15 years in and there's still so much
Sure.
to learn.
But even with that, I feel like there is, because we did it last year and we did it again this year, I still feel like every time we have one of these workshops, and to your point of it should be part of the daily culture, my business partner and co-owner of the business, when we first did our workshop, literally printed out faces and Bitmojis of all of our employees. And I'm like, I like to be talked to this, or I need this in my conversations, and put it in front of me underneath my desk in the glass. And it was really helpful for me. So that's part of keeping it in your daily culture. But should a company just engage you once a year to come back? Is there enough information? Is there enough growth in it to be able to do it just annually?
Yes. I think ideally it would be 2 to 3 times a year.
Oh, okay.
I think annually is great if the company and the team's committed to continuing to learn on their own without me there. I think the depth of the Enneagram and what is there to learn and to share is so incredibly deep. And there's blind spots occur all the time. I'm sure I'll talk to you 2 years from now and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea about Susan or Cami or yourself. These traits that come up and in these life stresses push the button on certain traits, right? Going back to stress, I will say for people that take the test and feel like they're not really sure on their type, make sure that you're not amidst a breakup or a move or a job change, these sort of bigger stress life moments, because that's not the right time to take it. Going back to your initial question, I think annually is great. I think if it could be 2 to 3 times a year would be awesome.
Love to hear that there's a lot to build on from that
Mhm.
standpoint. Last question we have, and it's an interesting question when it comes to talking to you. I ask everybody this: what do you do to take care of yourself? And here's the problem: is I know a lot about you, and I know what you do to take care of yourself. So tell me something that I don't know. Tell me something that doesn't relate to running triathlons
Yes.
or nutrition, or something that's just
Yeah.
outside of the normal of Jillian's everyday.
You're asking me at a very good time because I'm exploring that with
Oh.
myself, as nines tend to ignore fun and levity sometimes. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what's not intense sports training and not my career. So the 3 things I'm landing on that bring me some joy and fun in my life are my 2 very silly dogs that my partner and I make fun of all the time, and we have lots of voices and names for them. I recently started playing pickleball and signed up for some classes at Gates on the regular basis, which just puts me in a totally different mindset. I think that was really interesting, just being in the regular routine mindset and going to play and realizing I didn't know what day it was, what time it was, where I was at. And I was like, I haven't felt this in a long time. And I do love to bake. I love to bake treats and things like that. And so those 3 things, I'm just like cultivating a little bit more time and space for, because as I love routine, again, there's a healthy, non-healthy side. It can sometimes put me in the grind where all of a sudden I'm a little unhappy and I'm like, what is happening? When you have the power to make those decisions and the routine for your life, but all of a sudden it goes off the deep end a little bit. Would
When
be
your
more of
job in your life is
yes.
being healthy and
Yep.
having good nutrition, it's
Yep.
hard to break out of that.
Thank you for spending time with us in the Compliance Leadership Lounge with Ross Ronan. If you've enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your network. Your engagement helps us continue to bring in-depth and influential content in the world of healthcare compliance. Stay tuned for our next episode where we further explore leadership dynamics and compliance. Until then, remember, effective compliance is about leading with integrity, and leadership is about making a difference.